Well, hello, and welcome to episode 2 of the Fun and Interactive Podcast.
All right.
We are live, we are official.
Let's rock and roll, man.
Yeah, so I'm happy that we have week 1 in the books. I learned a lot this past week about podcasts in general and how to post them. I'm happy to report that we're on iTunes, we are on Google Play, and we are on Stitcher. So if you are listening to us from the future, you can catch us on any of those platforms. But I personally wanted to mention that we learned a lot after episode 1 as well, and we are going to be changing the format a bit. Specifically, Justin Larson is going to talk, and then Justin's going to talk some more, and then we're going to end up with Justin talking, because Justin is significantly more entertaining than I, having listened to it back. And,
No.
And now that I know that he's got such fun characters, like our DJ friend from Ladies Night available, I think that we're just going to rename this the Eddie Murphy podcast, and you'll just play every character.
I'm a pretty big Eddie Murphy fan, actually. Eddie Murphy and Peter Sellers are my acting inspirations.
Yeah, that doesn't surprise me at all. At best, I'm like the Martin Lawrence, meaning I can do like, me and Big Mama, like that's where my skills end.
I understand she's got a nice house.
She does in fact have a house.
I got a confession to make, man. I saw Big Mama's house in the theaters.
Wow. That is not a confession. That is something else.
I'll be seeing myself out now.
No, you have to talk the whole thing. In fact, I think that we just need to make it so that you do me, right? Like we should have you do impressions of I.
It's hard, man. It's hard. I actually work quite a bit on like getting like characters down. Actually, Orc, we've done him enough now that I watch him back and I see all the inconsistencies, like how he's slowly speaking more and more clearly. In the beginning, he was just a total moron.
Well, like anything, you get experience doing something, and you learn. And Orc is now speaking and more, smashing less.
That's true. That's true. You know what we could do tonight, Charmer? We could invite all of the ladies to come on down for a special podcast episode where not one, not two, not three, but as many ladies as can fit into the studio join us on the air.
I mean, you're not wrong. We could do that. My wife is like a room away. She is also significantly more entertaining than I.
I remember you saying one time that she used to stream some too, didn't she?
Yeah, that's going to be coming back here really soon, actually. So I've got some YouTube highlights of her doing it, but when I was trying to make the push for Twitch Partner, we kind of had to put it temporarily on hold because of concerns about consistency, right?
Right.
Because, like, her style and her audience is so drastically different from mine that we didn't want them to review the application and go, whoa, what's going on here? So we kind of had to nix it for a bit, but that's coming back, like, here real soon.
That's awesome. I am spamming Reddit with information about our podcast.
You should do just that. They need to know. The people need to know.
I agree. It would be fun one time to do one of these podcasts in character. I would need to drink quite a bit of coffee before I did this for 45 minutes.
Yeah, I think that I would have to then also commit to a character. I don't know which one that I would want to go with.
Honestly, like every little thing can inspire like one of these characters, right? Like with the DJ Ladies Night, it was listening to an Adam Carolla podcast, and I realized like I could totally pretend to be a sleazy Adam Carolla.
Is that like exclusive from the normal Adam Carolla?
Really good point. I feel like I think I don't know. I think Loveline's off the air now, but like growing up, Loveline was a big part of like what I did on the weeknights. You know, I would tune in on my radio, and I used to think Adam Carolla was like the smartest guy in the world. And looking back on it, like I realize he's kind of an idiot, but he was a big inspiration to me as a teenager.
Yeah, like realistically, he was like the last person that should have been on something like Loveline. You know what I mean? Like
Absolutely,
he is
yeah.
not like the model for what I would consider healthy relationship building by any means.
No, not at all. Not at all.
Oh, so what do we?
What are we going to be talking about tonight?
Oh man. How about how you are so good at making robot noises and impressions? We
Oh,
could
did I
start
just make a
that.
robot noise?
Yeah, it was just your connection, but since we were talking about your
Yeah.
impersonation skills, I felt like it was just appropriate timing, you know?
A robot would be a great character. I'm struggling to understand how I fit into Elder Scrolls lore, but then I reflected on most of my other characters.
Excuse you, Dwemer Knight, like
There we go. There we go.
here's what you do, right? You either can dress up like a Dwemer, you could cut out some cardboard, make make like one of those robot costumes like a little kid would and go that route, or the other alternative would be that you could be a dwarf, right? Weren't the Dwemer
Oh
built by
yeah,
dwarves, right? You
that's
look
right.
very,
That's right.
very dwarf-like.
I do. I do. And my ex. Yeah, we all look dwarvish.
Yeah.
Dwarven. I don't know. Dwarves are drifting close to like the offensive types of characters that I don't want to accidentally say something wrong in. Though I just the ladies' night one was tough. Like I actually recorded 6 games with that character, and they were just not not ready for prime time.
Well, all right. So clearly, this is not something that was on our agenda for the evening, but I have to ask the question, right? Do
Yeah.
you, when you are in character, right? Do you think that it is acceptable to say things that you would not agree with or that might be offensive if it does fit the character? Because I know that you got some slack for your Prophecy Battle Mage deck from a while ago, and I know that
Yes,
when you did like your 1% video, some people said
yep.
like don't get political even though you're really just trying to be like rich 80s guy, you know,
Right. Right.
whatever. But like I just wonder like the the line between a good character performance and a decent person aren't aren't always one and the same, and I was curious how you would both, well, how you've balanced that in the past, but how you would do that in the future, because I mean the Elder Scrolls universe is filled with a bunch of people that are, let's be honest, are just not very nice people.
Yeah, that's a
um,
good point. So I try to stay super unoffensive, like as Justin, just because I don't know. I don't want kids getting in trouble when their parents hear them watching the channel and stuff. I am a little more relaxed with the characters. The line actually that I ended up including in the video last night, or this morning, I guess when I released it, that I was most concerned about is when I said something about my whore of an ex-wife, and I went back and forth about it, and I talked to Sandra about it, and we decided that I should just post a comment, on the top of the YouTube video, saying, "Hey, I don't actually, this is not me. This is DJ Ladies Night." But I mean, like philosophically, I think that like, yeah, there's a huge difference between a character's performance and like actually represented as a human being. I mean, otherwise, everybody who ever played Hitler on TV would have some serious explaining to do.
sure.
What I want on the channel, I don't know. I try to keep it pretty light. I recognize that like there are a lot of Legends content creators, and what I want to do is have my own voice, and part of that voice is just being sort of silly, too serious. Like you said, the 1% guy, that was actually 99% ironically inspired by American Psycho, and I made jokes about business cards and stuff like that.
Yeah, no, it makes total sense.
Um, yeah, there was like 1% Trump jokes in there too, but
Well, I mean,
I
if
kind
he's
of hard
part
to
of the
avoid since.
1%.
Well, yeah, I mean, we went ahead and basically elected uh, American Psycho, so
Oh, that I gotta say, like, if he ever mid, I'm keeping this non-political as well, right? But just hear me out from like an experience standpoint. If he ever mid press conference, mid interview, just stopped and said, "I have to go now. I have to return some videotapes," like, I don't know what I would do. Like, I don't know if I would be like
Yeah,
happy and laugh or be legitimately concerned.
right.
Oh,
He's pretty funny. It's a shame he doesn't have a sense of humor about himself because he has a tremendously over the top personality that would really lend itself towards a little, making fun of himself. But that's all right.
yeah,
We're all here. We're all here to take care of that for him.
right. Once you're in that level of publicity, it's
Yeah,
somebody will do it for you. You know what I mean?
exactly.
You can't you
Plan all.
can't you can't just be a cameo in Home Alone 2 anymore.
That's true.
Oh.
He's a comedian's dream.
All right, so
Go ahead, man.
tonight I was gonna
Let's get on
say,
with it.
yeah, I was gonna say tonight we were gonna talk about like two things, and I thought we would start with the one that you had suggested this week, just because I actually thought it was a really neat and interesting topic, especially since with the mobile release, excuse me, I'm not drinking, I swear. With the mobile release, we got a pretty large influx of new players, and they are certainly familiar with Scout and Ramp Scout now. Um,
Yeah.
but they might not understand like the history. I was kind of chuckling to myself because I know I shouldn't have been, right? But like I was on Reddit the other day and I was reading something that somebody was, complaining about Scout at one point, and they said Scouts have always been around, but it was never a problem until this point, and then here's all the reasons why it's going to be bad in the future. And I was just
Yeah.
chuckling to myself, and I was like, if only you knew, right? Like the first
Right.
community tournament was won by what I call Money Scout. Like whenever I build a Ramp Scout deck, I put the $ for the S, and that's my own
That's right.
personal throwback to your Scout list, right? Like that's my nod to you. So if only people knew that Scouts been around for a long time, it just wasn't played very heavily early, at least in my opinion, because it was expensive to build, so people didn't
Yeah, I
have the
agree.
resources. So
Yeah, I'm sure that Wolf were super excited that the first tournament winning deck was one that cost an arm and a leg to build.
yeah, right.
It was fun. The joke was that at the time, like, Control Warrior was big in Hearthstone, and it was called Wallet Warrior. So I tried to make Skrilla Scout a thing, but it turns out there's not a lot of overlap between people who know what Skrilla means and people who play Elder Scrolls Legends.
What? No way.
I know this is going to come as a shock, but yeah. And, I mean, Scout's been through a lot of interesting changes, and there's always been Ramp Scout at varying degrees of playability, but there's been all sorts of other Scout decks too. I mean, like this spring, there was a while where Dazer, I think, popularized a Scout deck running Illusory Mimic, which was a lot of fun to watch him do.
Yeah.
And it showed up on the ladder quite a bit for a while when he started doing it. I mean, that was a deck that was a mid-range deck, but was able to beat you down with oversized purple creatures and incredibly overstated pretty quickly.
Yeah, I mean, I plan on touching on it obviously as we kind of talk about the history of the class in general, but
Yeah.
it's fair to say that Ramp is not the only type of Scout that has ever existed. Not only do we have Mimic Scout, but Mid-Range Scout has been a thing. In fact, I've been playing it this season. I went rank 4 right through from 4 to 3 by going like
Nice.
7 and 2 or something like that on Mid-Range Scout,
Nice.
right?
Nice.
Like not a ramp card in it, just tempo plays from agility and beefy things from endurance, and sometimes that's just enough, right? Like if you win control of the board, it plays just like sorcerer, but instead of wards, you just have the agility package. So that's certainly a thing. There's also been Silence Scout.
That's right.
Silent Spellsword typically is the one that comes to mind, but the old like imprisoned Death Lord, play a 7/7 for
For
4.
four Magicka 7/7s are
Yep.
good in every format.
And then
Yeah.
suppress it. And the reason that people did it in Scout was because it gave you access to Goblin Skulk to find your suppresses.
Exactly.
And some other fun, cheeky things like that. But that floated around for a bit and likes to show its face every now and then for giggles. There's also the... officially now after Skyrim, they'll forever be known as the High Hrothgar decks, but it was really
Right.
the Ring of Imaginary Might, right? So when the Ring of Imaginary Might became available, we had the Sabercat OTK decks. So,
Swift Strike and Swing for 28.
yeah.
Yeah, so in closed beta there was a few like decks rose and fell, right? And because the community was so small, and we were all posting on the Bethesda boards. Somebody would come up with a great new deck, and it would take over for a while. And I remember Action Mage was huge for a while, and then Orcs were huge, and then Orcs were nerfed, and then Archer got huge, and I really wanted to play with Blood Magic Lord, so I started running all the ramp cards so that I could actually play Blood Magic Lord before I got killed by goblins and stuff. Big and closed beta for a while. And right around the time, about 2 or 3 weeks after I started playing Scout, some of the ramp cards, Thorn Hist Mage, Tree Minder, had some balance changes to them, and the deck got better. And when Open Beta launched a few weeks later, I just kept playing Scout. It was a lot of fun.
Yeah.
I actually, when Open Beta started and we got that we had spent during closed beta and had our accounts wiped, I just soul trapped every card in my collection and rebuilt my Scout deck.
I mean, that seems fair. It's a fantastic deck, and it was... I remember the first time that I saw your version of it, and I thought to myself, like, that looks really neat. I was basically free to play for many, many months when I first started, so there was no way that I was building it anytime soon. But I remember saying, like, I really want to build that deck. It's actually really funny when I look back at my new player experience from when everything went to open beta. Like, I got in at the tail end of closed beta, so I got to kind of play around and see some things, and then I kind of knew, all right, when we go to open beta, these are the decks that I want to try to build. So I played Token Spellsword like everybody did because it was cheap, and that's what I hit Legend with the very first time. That's what got me into content creation. But secretly, my goal was actually always to play Ramp Scout and Pilfer Monk.
Absolutely.
And the truth is, I didn't play Ramp Scout until like 3 or 4 months after I had started, because I just was not opening the stuff to go along with it. It took me months before I opened my first Hist Mage. And I didn't play Pilfer Monk until 10 months into playing the game, because I legitimately never opened a Master of Thieves. And at that point, I was like, it's just a sign. Like, if I'm not... I've been playing this game for 10 months. I've never opened a Master of Thieves. Clearly, they don't want me to play this deck. That's actually how I feel. So, like, the deck I really want to play right now is Doomcrag Warrior. I've wanted to play it for like 4 or 5 months. I think that the archetype is cool. I can't really speak to how it performs because I've only played against it. I haven't played it personally, but it looks fun and it looks neat. But I own 0 Doomcrag Vampires. It is the only legend that I've never opened from core set, and I feel the same way. Like, at this point, the universe doesn't want me to play that deck, and so I just keep not crafting Doomcrag Vampires.
I'm glad you mentioned Doomcrag Warrior, because last week on the podcast I mentioned that I thought that there was one of the great unplayed decks right now was a Ramp Warrior deck using Rage and ping effects along with lethal creatures, and that's exactly what we've seen rise up this week.
Yeah, it does not surprise me at all. So I think
as exciting as reanimating an entire lane.
Yeah, right.
Yeah.
So I think that we should do what you had kind of talked about in passing with me over the course of the week, which is let's talk about the history, we'll call it, from like open beta to current about the Scout class, right? So
cool.
From a time frame standpoint, we had open beta. Open beta kicked off in the end of July of 2016. So again, if you're a new player and you don't know that, this game has been going for well over a year now. So when you hear people like Justin or myself or CVH complain like we're crotchety old men and feel
Hmm.
like, hey, these guys sound really entitled. I don't know why they're whining like it's a brand new game. Well, for us, we've been playing for a long time already. And so when the game launched, the first season lasted like 3 whole days or something. I legit think it came out like open beta wise on like July 27th or something like that of 2016. So the first real month was August, and that was, well, I mean, that was all you. So I'm gonna let you certainly talk about it. But you popularized Scout. Like it's safe to say.
Like I said, I had been looking for a way to play the big expensive cards. I started playing. My first deck was Action Mage, and that was fun. But there were just so many expensive creatures that I really wanted to start playing. And like you'd mentioned, Spell Sword tokens was everywhere at the time, so I started playing Charis Reaper in Archer, and I wanted to play Blood Magic Lord, so I just looked at all the ramp cards and tunnel visioned myself onto. Onto building Ramp Scout when open beta launched. So, I bought 60 packs, I think, and then I collection
Yeah.
and built it. And then I went ahead and just like a week or two into they had the first championship series tournament, came down to TVP's Archer deck, mid-range Archer, and my Scout deck in a best of 5. Came down to the final game, and Blood Magic Lord actually sealed the deal for me. I hit the drain life that I needed to win the game that turn. And there were a lot of differences in that version of the deck than the post Histgrove versions. I mean, Histgrove wasn't a thing for a while, so at the time, your win conditions were Tazcad, which was cheaper before it got nerfed. You're just beating down with Nahag Leave. The deck transitioned into attacking face much more quickly because the whole meta was a little slower, so you didn't have to spend as much time stabilizing. I mean, Venom Tongue, we just saw it right there, was in the deck as another ramp source, and you just look to win with Odaving, Blood Magic Lord, Blood Magic Spells, Tazcad,
Yeah,
and stuff
and
like that.
I was gonna say early on, a lot of people probably don't even like ever think this card was playable, but I remember the card I probably lost to the most was Black Marsh Warden. Like it was
Yeah,
considered a staple. It wasn't like a three
absolutely.
of, but it was absolutely considered a staple of Scout back in the day. And it's so interesting how like deck lists evolve over
Hmm.
time and how things like shift because
Yeah,
now like you look at it and you like
right,
can barely justify including it, right? Like it's a 4 cost card that dies to Firebolt, but
right.
it was everywhere at the time.
Yeah, Black Marsh Warden is a good way to sort of sum up how the deck was range deck that exploded, as you got to the late game. But using stuff like Black Marsh Warden, you were able to, create multiple bodies. And even if you got, one trigger on it at the end of your turn, you usually are getting enough value. The deck didn't draw very many cards back then. I mean, it didn't have access to Reanimation or Eclipse Baroness or anything like that. So you were looking for any way to squeeze out value with stuff like Murkwater Witch and Leaf Lurker. You also had like I'll be honest, like I used to run Deadly Draugr in that deck as a way to stabilize in the early game because there was no Dark Guardian. Um, we were all new to the game, and so the deck is weaker than optimized versions of it were. But that first version of Ramp Scout stayed pretty popular then until Control Mage rose up, and you want to talk a little bit about what that did to Scout?
Well, the original Scout, if you're new, did not have Hissgrove.
Right.
It did not have Eclipse Baroness, as you said. It did not have Soul Tear. It did not have Skeletal Dragon.
Yeah.
In fact, the biggest weakness of that deck, period, was its quality lack of card draw. The only things that it really ran were Ungolem, and then you had to like draw into your guys. Maybe a couple of Shadow Shifts, and then your Thieves Guild recruits, and then that was kind of it at the time.
Hmm.
Um, really, the deck it's interesting. I see things pop up all the time now about how people will say like, Ramp Scout is a control deck. No, it's a mid-range deck, and there's this argument. And I think that the people who say it's a mid-range deck just remember the way it used to be played, and they adopted that play style, and so they continue to play it that way. Like right now, the alter shout version of Scout that exists as we know it today, post Heroes of Skyrim, I would say is probably closer to a control deck, right? You're utilizing your Drain Vitalities to control the board, your Sheer Points to control the board. It's very much a like late game control style deck. But your version and the early versions were very much a mid range deck. They just came
Absolutely.
online at 7. Like 7 was the magic number. You played ramp to race to 7 Magicka, and then you won with things like Black Marsh Warden. You won with things like Preserver of the Root, right? Like once you hit 7,
Right.
your fatties were online, and then you immediately just started, outvaluing your opponent and trading face. And Control Mage at the time, because Scout didn't have the good card draw that it did, actually just thumped on Scout because you came online at 7, but they came online with Dawn's Wrath at 8 and Manticora at 10. And at the time,
there were more answers than there were threats.
they had more answers than there were threats. They had better card draw because Elusive Schemer was rampant, and they had all of the pre-nerfed versions of the cards that were in Control Mage. So if you're, again, new, Manticora used to be able to kill something in one lane and guard another one, right? It did not kill something in the same lane. Elusive Schemer used to be a 4-1 instead of a 3-1, so it was very, very good at trading up while generating value. Similarly, the Shrieking Harpies used to be a 2-2, so they could eat things like your Thieves Guild recruit and then still survive at the time, which might not seem like a big deal, but like every little bit of advantage mattered, and all of the pre-nerfed Control Mage cards just shut out Scout. They had a far better late game. And so it was kind of like dead or pushed out really until October, right?
Right. That's right. That was Histgrove. And that was moment for Legends, actually. Like, I like to track the growth of Legends sort of in conjunction with the growth of the channel. Because YouTube gives you a lot of information about demographics and views and like stuff like that. And when Histgrove came out, the game was experiencing like its first huge surge of growth that it had experienced in a couple months since open beta release. And it was a great time to play Scout because suddenly Scout had an end game against Control Mage that Control Mage could not beat. And Control Mage had been the dominant force in the meta, the defining control deck of the meta anyway, for quite a while there. And I want to throw one last thing out there about the mid-range Scout deck, the mid-range ramp Scout deck that I had been playing. Part of the reason you were able to get away with that is that there were no decks that were running a lot of prophecy cards. In fact, for the most part, none of us were running a lot of prophecy cards in general. It was kind of looked at like it was a community thing, right? Like people who signed up for the Legends beta initially, a lot of them were coming from Hearthstone. Hearthstone has a huge problem with RNG, and so when you're looking at a mechanic that like has like, let's say you put nine prophecy cards in your deck, like, well, you have a 9 in 50 chance when you break a rune to draw a prophecy card. There was a tendency among the type of players who were coming to the game to not really factor that in as heavily as it's turned out to matter.
Yeah.
And so there were just, as a result of the nature of the community, we were running a lot less prophecy cards, and so you were able to just beat down with Preserver of the Root and be pretty confident that you were going to win the game. But yeah, when Histgrove came out, the deck became, it slowed the deck down. Like you started running, you'd see fewer young mammoths and more defensive cards, more mummifies to nullify your opponent's Odiving so that you could survive to turn 15 or whatever it was going to take to beat him down with Leviathans.
Yeah.
At the same... Go ahead, dude.
All right. Oh, we totally train crashed there. I was gonna say one of my favorite things to do, like when I'm really nostalgic or bored, is to go back and look at how we assessed things back then, just in general. Because I remember when Histgrove got revealed, I know that I said it, and I was not the only person, I won't name names, but I was not the only person who looked at Histgrove and legitimately said 15 Magicka is too much. This might get played and it might not. Like, we were borderline on whether Histgrove was going to be included. Like, it was one of those, like, hey, like, if you make it to 15 Magicka, then you've probably already won the game anyway. It feels very win more.
Right.
But that was because, the nature of the game was just so different back then. And of course, now we know that to be totally not the case. It kind of reminds me of even recently, right? Like if we go back and we look at the reactions to Ulfric's House Carl, and
Yeah.
everybody was saying, and I mean it, like I was one of the few people I think that was really like stumping for the card after it was revealed. But if you look through the comments on YouTube videos, if you look through the comments on Reddit, on the forums, etc., you'll see a lot of people saying like, this is strictly worse than Ayla's Huntmate. I'm really disappointed that this card isn't going to affect the meta, blah blah blah.
Right.
And if you've played
Defining last season.
yeah, if you've played that card in Token Crusader, and I'm ashamed to admit it, but I've put a lot of games on Token Crusader lately. It is not at all worse than Ayla's Huntsmate. It is fantastic. I draw 2 or 3 cards a game from that. The fact that it is a willpower card also matters because of your ally triggers. It counts towards Imprison. Like, there was all those things that were staring us right in the face, but there were a lot of people who were saying it was strictly worse than Huntsmate, especially in aggro, and that it was likely not going to see much play. And Hisgrove was like that, right? There was, with the exception of Sower, I don't think there's ever been a monthly card that people saw and immediately said, like, this will for sure be played.
Yeah, I agree. And Sower is an interesting example, actually, because while a powerful card that did see a ton of play immediately after release, try now, despite being at the same power level as before.
Yeah.
It was great. Hisgrove also created enough ramp opportunities in non-scout decks to start running ramp packages and other things. And being the contrarian that I am, I built Hisgrove ramp and had a lot of success with that. And then proceeded to stop playing Scout for a while and built Ramp Sorcerer because Ramp Scout got popular. And Ramp Sorcerer could go bigger and dumber, which is what I ended up naming the deck. You could go over the top of Ramp Scout by running Supreme Atromancer and Nakreen and the 3-cost blue action that sacrifices a creature to summon one that costs 2 more. So you were able to do bigger things than Scout does, and that was my answer to how to beat Scout.
Yeah, that worked for a bit. Before we continue on with the old history of Scout, I do also want to say real quick, because you mentioned the nerf that shall not be named, Nakreen. I remember the backlash, and I remember all of the things that people said when that card got the nerf, right? For many, many months, it was in many ways one of the very first like real memes for the community because, it got nerfed, and at the time we saw no real reason why. Like, we knew that Control Mage was strong, but like nobody would have said it's strong because of Nakreen. It had great plays, but like we looked at it and we were just like, I don't understand why this got hit so hard. Why can't it just like reduce by 10 or reduce by 8? But now, now that we have the same info that the developers likely had all that time ago, because we knew the Skyrim expansion was coming a long time ago from data mined info, right?
Right.
So, it existed back then when they made that nerf. I can't imagine a world where Nakreen in the old form existed and Alduin as he exists right now existed, right? Like that just kind of like blows my mind to even think about. Holy cow, we could have been seeing like turn 8 complete board wipes, broken nonsense. Even if it was a reduction like a lot of people push for, right? They were saying like, well, just, if the concern is, playing Odoving for free, then just reduce it by 10 or reduce it by whatever, keep the card intact. And again, knowing what we know about Alduin now, I don't think that would have been enough, right? And I'm sure that they tested it internally, came to the same conclusion. It's one of those times where we had to put our faith in Direwolf Digital, and despite them doing things that we frequently scratch our heads with, the truth is more often than not they get it right.
No, I totally agree. When I met the guys at Direwolf, actually, we talked about Nakreen for a while actually, because Nakreen is still to this day the only card I don't own, and then now it's just sort of I think it's funny, so I soul trap it when I get it. But I mean, let's be fair for a second. It's totally unplayable. It's but um I was talking about that, and they were all pretty like they felt kind of guilty about it seemed, but they basically said like, look, there's no way like that we can keep this card around. It breaks too many things.
Yeah, I even current Nakreen makes me nervous, if I'm being honest, because one of the effects that I desperately want in the game is what I call hand extension. So if you've ever played Magic the Gathering, there are certain effects where you are allowed to draw one or multiple cards and then take cards from your hand and put them back on top of your deck. And my very first like ever episode of The Forge, the rework for Somerset Orrery that I had suggested was to give that effect, right? I said, hey, this thing costs 6. It's a straight tempo loss. It shouldn't just, shuffle and redraw things. Like, it should have a cool effect, right? So my pitch was, on activation, it should draw a card and then let you choose a card in your hand to put back on top of your deck. Because that could set up prophecies. That could let you bluff, right? That's something that's, I think, more prevalent in card games where you're playing like across the table from somebody, Magic or in poker and things like that. But in digital card games, it's typically much harder to bluff somebody. But that card, like, you could activate it if you don't have a prophecy in your hand, but now your opponent's going, all right, did he just put a javelin on top? I like that mechanic. I'd love to see it in this game, but I think that the existence of Nakreen as he is right now is still something that would prevent that, right? Like, they would have to rework him again because of his, like, I get to play whatever I put on top of my deck for free clause.
Yeah, that's a really good point. I really, I don't know why it's never occurred to me until now, but the ability to play a brainstorm type card in Legends has so much more power than I had ever given it credit for because of the ability to put prophecies on top of your deck. That's a really cool idea.
Not just even prophecies, but think about like guaranteeing your ally trigger, right? Like, you could run 50-50 decks and not have to worry as much about your color count, but still reliably get triggers. Like, there's so many cool things that would come from that hand extension style of effect. So yes, it is powerful, right? That's why I think that if you rework something like Orrery, then it's a 6-cost card and it's a tempo loss, but then you offset it by the potential power of it. I think that would be fair. But it is an effect that I desperately wish was in the game because of the strategy it would introduce,
Too, when you w're mentioning the bluffing thing, I mean, I as a guy who just loves poker, when I would play Magic, I used to I would do that move where like you put your hands on your lands, one hand on your lands, one your other hand in your hand when you're thinking about make it look like you might respond to their spell, and when in truth like your hand is just a bunch of swamps or something.
Yeah,
I like that.
People started to catch on that. So my other one, when I was playing blue often a lot, was like I would leave my lands open or whatever, and then they would play something, and I'd say, "Hold on." Right, like I might respond, right. And I would kind of like lean back in my chair and kind of stare at my hand a bit, right? Like I was thinking it over, because like the land, like the minute you like almost touched your lands, like that started to give it away. I think to people like, okay, that's just a bluff, so you had to get creative, but it absolutely was. Like, that matters a lot in physical card games. If you've never played like Magic in person, I legit won a game at a tournament once by accident through a bluff, Justin. No joke. This was
let's hear the story.
This was like a pre-release sealed event tournament, right? And I swing, right, and I get this guy to where like if I could just get one more turn, I got guaranteed lethal, but I don't have like any response to his board, like whatsoever, right? So bluffing, right? So one of the tactics in Magic is if you've already got enough lands where you have like capped yourself pretty hard in your deck, it's actually pretty common if you draw more lands to just keep them in your hand.
Of course,
right? So like I was doing that. I had 2 lands in my hand, no other effects, nothing, right? I get him in position where I can swing for lethal because I had flying, the next turn, and I pass the turn, right? He untaps, draws his card, and immediately starts turning all of his creatures sideways, right? So I'm like, okay, like he's got the lethal. And so I say in response, and I shit you not, I wasn't even trying to be cheeky. The words that were about to come out of my mouth were in response, I concede. But I said in response, and he goes, wait. And then he looks at the board and he starts doing like some mental math, right?
Yeah.
I don't know
Yeah.
what he was doing, but he's doing mental math. And he
Yeah.
pulls back two of his creatures and he goes, all right, I declare these as attackers. And I go, okay, no blocks, right? Like, and he doesn't have anything, and I just win, like by accident. So, like bluffing is definitely something that matters, and it just doesn't
Yeah.
in the digital. Like realistically, right? Like it just doesn't matter in the digital format as much because you're not reading body language, you're not doing all of those things that you can get away with when you're sitting across the table from somebody.
Right. Yeah, I totally agree. That's a great story. I uh I like that part of it too. I mean, that was always part of my fun in Magic too. Like, or Magic. I'm sorry, in poker was, you don't have to be a ton of math skills to be good at poker. What you really need to do is look like you're doing something you're not actually doing, and you just don't have the opportunity in Legends. But introducing a bluff mechanic like manipulating the top of your library, or your top top of your library, top of your deck, is a way you could introduce that, and I think that would be a lot of fun. I like that.
Yeah, I think it would be cool if there was something like that, or even just mechanics that like purposefully spread misinformation, right?
Right. I
Like,
agree.
I already did like one version of Maik the Liar for my Forge series where I had proposed something, but the more I was thinking about it, like, how cool would it be if Maik was just like a unique legend, and every time that you had any effect that would reveal a card to your opponent, right? Like maybe you put in like a small cycle of cards that are like reveal a card in your hand to your opponent to do something, right? You're trading information for a bonus. How cool would it be if Maik said, while he's in your deck, anytime you reveal a card to your opponent, show Maik instead?
Hmm.
You know,
Oh, I like that a lot.
right?
Hmm.
So it's just like you
That's one of
don't
the
know. Does he
cool,
really have
yeah,
Maik? Does he not? Like, I love
cool
stuff
things you
that
can
would,
only do in digital card games, and I think we need more of that.
yeah.
Eternal's really good at doing things that you can only do in digital card games, and I think that what we saw in Heroes of Skyrim was some of the ideas that I've seen in Eternal, like buffing cards that are still in your deck, giving them keywords and stuff like that. Those are things that have been done in Eternal for a while. They're pretty good about putting cards on top of your deck as well. So I would not be surprised if in the next expansion or two we got mechanics like that, because it seems like some of that stuff, because Direwolf makes both games, some of those good ideas then carry over to the bigger property.
Yeah, absolutely. And I kind of hope that we see it too, as long as it's the right way. I think that the Direwolf, right or wrong, caught a lot of flack for Echo and for
Yeah.
Commander. Probably because for much of the player base that was their first introduction to effects like those. Like we didn't have Warcry
Right.
for
Exactly.
uh,
Exactly.
people to digest the way that you already had it in Eternal, right? So
Right.
I
Or
think that,
Echo.
yeah. So I think that that's part of the reason that the negative the negative outcry occurred, but I would like to
Yeah.
see more of those effects. Anytime that you can take advantage of the medium, I'm personally a big fan. So this tangent brought to you by Dex Not Ramp Scout. We should probably finish that train of thought.
That's all right. It's a good show, man. It's a good show.
Yeah. So where were we? We were talking about all right, Ramp Scout hit Hisgrove era, right? And then started to become
Right.
more and more late game install. And so like the next thing that like really affected Scout as a class probably at that point was Madhouse, which would have been December. And I say that
Right.
just because that's when Mimic came out,
Mhm.
like you had mentioned.
Yeah, Mimic introduced and I got to give a lot of credit to Dazer here, the streamer. Mimic introduced a new deck to the Scout pantheon, and that was Mimic Scout. There are a lot of with keywords that we're seeing fringe play if they were seeing play in Scout. I mean, cards like Giant Bat, which of course now is in a lot of Scout decks, but cards like Giant Bat, cards like the 3/2 Lethal Prophecy Spider, and even a couple purple cards with Ward. ramp scout cards, and because Mimic looks at the top 5 cards of your deck and grabs all the keywords off of them and puts them onto it, you were faced with a deck that had the potential of the most incredibly explosive turn 6 play of like a charge, guard, drain, uh, you know,
Ward.
bird, Mimic, and the way that he built the deck, it was not super unrealistic that it was going to have 3 or 4 keywords every time he played it. And the deck, it sort of exploded at first because it was something different to do with Scout, and Scout had been a popular class because of the history of Ramp Scout, and people, were familiar with the deck. It was, something people knew about, and but the opportunity to play a different kind of Scout that could kind of throw your opponent for a loop when they saw your early game had featured some similar cards, but then exploded into this true mid-range deck. It was a lot of fun. Again, like I said, the days are for that, but that deck was all over the place for a while. And Illusory Mimic, kind of like a lot of the cards in the Madhouse collection, did a really good job of creating a brand new archetype with a single card. I mean, that's how powerful Illusory Mimic could be in that deck. But what it also hinted at was the fact that there are, a lot of strong mid-range cards in these colors that aren't played a whole lot necessarily because of the popularity of Ramp Scout as the default option for playing Scout. And I think that a lot of the ideas that went into that deck are seeing a second life now in the mid-range Scout deck of today.
Yeah, I would say that's fair. I mean, it was definitely, it was a mid-range deck that just focused on the value from keywords, right? Like other mid-range decks in the past had either focused on stats, or let's be honest, just ward as a keyword, right? Sorcerer was kind of the perfect combination of both. It was, and in many ways still has the potential to be, but it was for a long time like the mid-range deck. So it was nice when Scout kind of got those tools. Madhouse.
Yeah, I mean mid-range Sorcerer, I think, owes a lot of its success and long-term popularity, like the run it had this winter and spring, to the fact that so many of its creatures were so resistant to the removal in Control Mage, which was for a long time a really popular deck. Firestorm, Ice Storm, Firebolt, these cards, even like trading with Harpies, was a lot less successful against mid-range Sorcerer than it was against any other deck.
Yeah, Madhouse was interesting because for being as small as it was, it introduced a lot of new archetypes.
Yeah.
And it's interesting to me because when I think about Heroes of Skyrim, Fall of the Dark Brotherhood, right? Those sets certainly introduced new cards. They certainly introduced a lot of quality cards that see play today. But the combination of the two of those, I don't think spawned nearly as many decks as Madhouse did, just like on its own, right? Like Orcs were played prior, but like they, without Stone Shard, like they did not have any sort of relevancy at all, right? Not since closed beta, really.
Exactly.
So then we also got like the item sorcerer because of Gardener, and we got altar assassin and altar monk, and now altar mage and so forth coming out of that. And I'm gonna go ahead and say, because I know that it was kind of done a little bit before, but similar to Orcs, the Wisp Mother OTK deck wasn't like realistically viable until Madhouse because of Merchant's Camel as well.
That's right.
That increased the consistency a ton.
Right.
Then you have Swindler's Market decks.
Even Close Call and Altar of Despair were used in Wisp Mother OTK decks sometimes.
Yeah. So like Swindler's decks, like there were so many things that spawned from that tiny thing, and then Skyrim has fantastic cards in it, and it certainly spawned like dragon decks and shout decks, both of which are like have been Scout, right? Like there's been Dragon Scout, there's been Shout Scout, but like ultimately it was also still just a different flavor of Ramp Scout. Similar with Fall of the Dark Brotherhood, like we got unstoppable rage archer, but let's be honest, like it was still mid-range archer, and you just kind of shoehorned a couple more pieces into it.
Right.
Madhouse, like for being as small as it was so well designed, and I would really like to see something like that again. I think.
I totally agree. I really hope that the next expansion is a smaller one with a, you know, not that there weren't smaller one with no filler cards. I just want a handful of cards that inspire me to build totally new decks, as opposed to streamlining, decks that we already have. I remember last week we talked about how, when we were talking about the progression of the meta, one of the questions we posed were whether or not it was possible that over time, as the card pool increases, the meta will actually become slimmer in terms of like playable tier 1 decks, because you're no longer forced to run just 35 cards you would always run and then 15 kind of filler flex cards. You have 50 cards that are best in slot, right? And the opportunity to upgrade cards you didn't want to be running in your old Ramp Scout deck or your old whatever deck. When Heroes of Skyrim came out, you just erased those crappier cards, and the decks that had the best 50 then were a lot more likely to win because you weren't running those flex cards. I would love to see a small set of cards that gives you the opportunity to just build something completely different.
Yeah, I was kind of thinking about the card release cycle, right? So last week on the podcast, I had kind of briefly touched on how I think we are due for an influx of new cards soon, just based on we had Madhouse in December, Fall of the Dark Brotherhood was in March, Heroes of Skyrim was late June, right? So now as we're rolling into September, it wouldn't shock me if like late September, early October, we get some sort of announcement. Might not even be like the release, right? But like some sort of announcement of something. I would probably wager it's going to be another story content style mission.
Yeah.
Like if I was a betting man, I would say it's going to be Dawn Guard themed, probably to go with Skyrim, fill in the stuff that was obviously left out and be similar to the Fall of the Dark Brotherhood, right? But how cool would it be if like every year we got kind of like at least one Madhouse? You know what
That'd
I
be
mean?
amazing.
Like I know that it's smaller, but if the density of the cards is small but the impact is high, I'm totally okay with that, right? Like give me one just solid build around, like, and I like the way they did Madhouse too. Like on the one hand, it's kind of rough on new players if they really want to play those archetypes that they have to fork over, the gold or the money. That's kind of a bummer, but it's nice that like you unlock it and you immediately have all of the build around cards as well.
Right.
So like from that standpoint, I dig it, and I would like to see at least once a year we get something like that.
I totally agree. And you're right, in some respects it can be rough on the new players, but on the other hand, with the advent of Twitch drops, I mean, 1,500 gold is not much, right? And it's also, essentially, is like as far as the investment goes in buying Heroes of Skyrim packs versus the investment it takes to get a hold of the Madhouse collection, it's $10-15 or whatever, and you're gonna have the whole set, wherein you could spend hundreds of dollars on Heroes of Skyrim cards to not get the whole set.
Yeah, that is true. I haven't spent hundreds of dollars, but I also still don't have a set. So as somebody who plays as often as I do, I think that says a lot in and of itself. I don't have a full core set yet, though, and I'm not even soul trapping Nocranes. I'm just unlucky in my openings.
Right. I do have a full core set. I just don't have Nocrane. I don't really
Yeah.
count him anymore. He's a bonus card that you can own if you'd like.
Would be-
Actually, a quick aside, man. I had to craft for that ladies' night video. I had to craft 2 Gerald Foragers because it turns out you don't get those in packs, and you only get one from the starter decks. So I actually had to craft 2 Gerald Foragers.
Legit, not even joking. I have crafted all of those cards that you only get from the story thing because it drove me nuts in my collection not having 3 ofs. So now I own 3 Scuttlers. I own 3 Jarell Foragers. What is it? Hold on, let me go look. Morthal Watchman or whatever. Yeah, Morthal Watchman. Yeah, I went and crafted them all like really early on. Now I don't own premium versions yet. Like that's the next step, but
Right. I'd be curious. I mean, I wonder. I'd love to see from Direwolf the stats on how many people own premium Gerald Foragers.
I mean, if you want, I'll go craft some right now.
I would love to watch that happen. Actually, if you wouldn't mind just crafting a single premium Gerald Forager, I need to see this animation. I think that the audience deserves this.
I gotta find it first. Oh yeah, here we go.
I'm excited about this.
Do they even have a premium version? Oh, they do.
Let's see. It should have the most amazing art ever. I'm ready.
And hey, the clouds are moving in the back. That's better than
Nice.
some. The berries shine.
I was paid to do this. Here, ladies and gentlemen, is a Gerald Forager in all her dolled up, best
Well,
glorious
just so we're
night
clear,
out on the town.
I now own a playset just because I couldn't just have one. And we're gonna soul.
That's awesome.
We're gonna soul trap the other ones. So now I just own premium Gerald Foragers.
In the premium version, the schnozberries look like schnozberries. That's awesome.
So, wrapping it up.
Congratulations.
Yeah, no, that's. I feel good about that. I feel really good. Wrapping it up. So we had Madhouse, and that gave us like mid-range Scout, or at least a taste of it. And then we had Fall of the Dark Brotherhood, and that changed Scout because of the introduction of Eclipse Baroness.
Yeah, it was a pretty significant switch. I mean, Eclipse Baroness and Dark Brotherhood let you cut. You know, there were versions of Scout that were running the 3/3 Prophecy 3/3 for 3 guard green creature. Fit so nicely into the early defensive game that Scout was looking for, and then Eclipse Baroness gave it, you know, some late game staying power to really further crush. You know, the control decks that it's sort of the control mage deck had kind of regained some popularity when Histgrove was nerfed. By triggering at the beginning of the turn, it meant that mage had a counterplay if they were pocketing a vicious dreg, and it also meant that control spell sword now with its Edict of Azuras and Black Sap Protector. I'm sorry, Black Sap Protector. That's the card I was just thinking of. And Shadowfen Priest were able to hit your Histgroves as well. Eclipse Baroness gave you a ton of draw power and staying potential against those decks.
Yeah, I mean, that's kind of the reason that I was mentioning Baroness. Dark Guardian was certainly a welcome addition to Scout, but for me, I think that is the moment where Scout like reasserted itself over Control Mage, right?
Right.
It didn't have many card draw tools before, and it went from not having many to immediately having like way more. Even if you Miract a Baroness, it still wasn't enough to like outdraw Scout. Baroness was so good in the control archetype. So it's interesting. Scout definitely got the tools to beat Control Mage when Fall of the Dark Brotherhood hit, but it wasn't even the greediest deck. Like, we had that weird like 2-week period where like Control Mage was, you know, popular before the release, and then it got kind of pushed out a little bit by Scout running Baroness, and then Scout got pushed out by Control Monk because that ended up being the greediest of the options.
Exactly. You could run all of the best late game cards in the game at the time.
Yeah. So, like, Scout's mini dominance didn't last long, but it set the precedent for, okay, this like has the potential to like beat out the other ones. And then of course Heroes of Skyrim launched, and we are where we are today, and because of the tools that Endurance got, now in, you know, Scout, there are so many more ways to generate card advantage that like not even the greed of late game Control Monk can keep up. Because late game Control Monk was all about like, you win the best 1-for-1 trades, or in some
Right.
cases 2-for-1s with like a Dawn's Wrath or something, and then you drew with Baroness.
Yeah.
Scout still outdraws you there, right? Like
Yeah, between Baroness, Skeletal Dragon,
Solitaire.
and Dead Shout, I mean, you generate something, and Parthenax, you generate something approaching infinite value in the late game.
Yeah,
And
it's
of that deck, of the Scout ramp deck now pushing out the other control decks, you're finding the meta full of decks that are trying to beat Scout. And unfortunately, decks that beat Scout are near aggressive decks.
yeah, I mean, basically, right now you either have to be hyper aggressive or you have to have really good tempo options.
Right, right.
You know, believe it or not, I actually still think that things like Assassin, for example, are fine against Scout, even with the nerf to Supreme Atromancer.
Yeah,
More often than not, when I was beating Scout, I was beating Scout not because of Supreme Atromancer, and if I was playing Supreme Atromancer, it was a glorified Lightning Bolt. You know what I mean?
right, right, right.
So really it's can you snowball your board,
Right.
because unless they run unless they hit their upgraded drain vitalities and they run giant snakes and they hit their like red Brahmin and into Odivang. I'm not saying that stuff doesn't happen, because it does, right? Like Scout can do ridiculous things, but
Yeah,
unless they do that, like, you just win if you can snowball against them. And so that's why, unfortunately, we are where we are,
right.
because the deck is popular. It's popular because, like, who doesn't like to play big things, right?
I don't blame anybody for wanting to play Scout.
Yeah,
And it's also, pretty unique in digital card games. I play several, and it has a feel unlike any other, really, I'd have to say.
I think for me the difference is noticed because the combat is different here. Um,
Yeah.
and because of the additional like graveyard mechanics, and I don't know, like, I mean, you're right, it definitely feels different here. Like, I've played ramp decks before in Magic. My second favorite deck to play in Standard ever was Death Cloud Kakusho.
Yeah.
So back
Oh.
when Kamigawa was
Yeah.
that was in Standard, the first Kamigawa, because I think they went back or whatever. But I played a deck that's entire purpose was to go like turn 2 Sakura Tribe Elder, turn 4. God, his name's escaping me at the moment. But essentially, it was a 4-drop 2/2 that also fetched a land from your deck, and when he died, you would draw a card. He's an artifact
Oh, yes,
dude.
Solemn
So,
Simulacrum.
yeah, Solemn Simulacrum. I just couldn't. I could picture the art, but I couldn't think of the name. So, like,
Yeah,
the goal,
Sabro.
the best curve was like Ninja Turtle into the Golem, and then on the following turn, I would untap, play my land, have 6 lands, 6 mana. Hopefully,
Mhm.
if my opponent is not playing the mirror, he only has 3 at that point, and then you would just Death Cloud for 3.
Right,
And
right.
your opponent would have no creatures, because there's no way they have more than 3 at that point. No lands, probably not much of a hand, if any. You yourself would probably not have much of a hand, minus the card you would draw from the Simulacrum, but you would have 3 more lands than them, right? So
Yep.
they basically are stuck playing draw go, and you get to play whatever else you want for the rest of the game. And it was horribly unfun to play against, but I've said several times I was that guy in Magic. I loved those kinds of strategies.
The
And
guy who
then
the guy who drafts Moxes in Armageddon
yeah,
in Cube Draft.
yeah, absolutely, right? Like, I was that guy. So and then Kakusho was your backup plan, right? Like, if you didn't draw your Death Cloud, then you were hoping to go 2, 4, 6 into Kakusho, because he was just crazy good value at the time. Um, but yeah, so like, even when you play that kind of ramp style game, or even if you're playing like the Titan ramp decks or things like that, it doesn't feel the same in Magic as it does here. And I think it partially doesn't because it's not got the like linear progression of the resources, right?
Yeah.
Like in Magic, ramping feels, you don't really play ramp in Magic. I mean, you do ramp because you want to play big things, but in many cases, especially in like standard formats, you play ramp because of consistency reasons, right? Like you're trying to thin your deck out and you're trying to ensure that you can play
Right.
cards. Period. Um,
Right. Yeah, no, I totally agree with you. Um, I remember when I got out of prison, I started watching old Channel Fireball videos to see what standards were like over the years, and because I didn't really know what was going on in Magic, and I really was curious about the history. And I remember watching videos of when Doran was in Standard. There was an Abzan deck. I mean, it wasn't Abzan at the time, but white, black, green. That was ramping into things like Cloud Thresher
yeah.
and stuff like that. And that's the deck, actually, the only deck in Magic history I can think of that reminds me of the Scout Ramp deck, what that feels like. A long ways. I would love to see in the future, if we're talking about what we'd like to see future Scout decks look like. I know that not every color can be all things to all people, but I'd love to see a tempo aggressive Scout deck. Maybe just a few more cards for a self-silent Scout to be a thing. Or a 0-drop that makes Goblin Skulk as an aggressive card or a tempo card in Scout more appealing instead of just Curse and Goblins. The opportunity for some sort of in flavor in the color pie type situation, board clearance Scout, so that you could run a true control deck type Scout that's not just ramping into creatures. A deck that forgoes ramp for board control. Forgoes guards for board control with removal. There's a lot of different things you can do with Scout. I'd love to see Argonian Tribal supported. I think that could be a place where you could get a tempo deck or a aggressive deck in Scout and still be sort of on flavor. What about you?
I mean, I'd love to see Argonian Tribal. I don't know what theme you'd go with. I mean, typically Argonians are kind of like a weird mix right now, right? Like with Khajiit, like okay, like their things probably pilfer. Not that every Khajiit does it, but it's pretty,
Yeah,
um, it's pretty, heavy there, right? But Argonians, like they silence things, and some have lethal, and some ramp, and they like of the races, in my opinion, they kind of have like maybe the worst identity outside of goblins, because goblins do a little bit of everything, but they just do it cheaply. Like that is their identity, right? But like Argonians are kind of all over.
yeah, yeah. I'd be interested to see, what direction they take Argonians in the future. I'm sure we'll see more tribal support as time goes on. Um, where the future of Scout could go. Right now, I mean, if you're gonna play Scout, like it's you're gonna play the Thorn Hist Mage, right? And that leads you towards a certain idea because you have this powerful card that's giving you a certain sort of situation on the board, and it causes you to play things like the altar decks, the shout decks, the ramp decks, right? But I'd like to
Right.
see a compelling reason to not run Thorn Hist Mage and Scout, for instance.
Yeah, I think part of it is Thorn Histmage is just as good as it is. Like even without a ramp strategy, like its body and its effect are just good enough by themselves because you're getting a 3/5 guard, so it's nice and defensive. But if they don't answer it, like it can go on offense pretty quickly, right? Like because it's
Right.
growing in power every turn. So I think that in
Yeah.
many ways, like it almost does too much, right? Like it fills too many roles, and I think that's why like people feel compelled or almost required to play it. And then the minute you throw that in, you're like, well, I might as well throw in the other ramp stuff, and then
hmm
down the rabbit hole you go.
It leads you down. It's one of the few class specific cards that sort of really encourages a certain deck. Warrior sort of had that going on with the orc cards, but the addition of the sower and of the card that buffs a creature and a weapon in your hand, I think do a good job of moving you in other potential directions in Warrior. Scouts never really had a card like that.
Yeah, I think that's fair.
The Scouts report, I guess, kind of encourages a sort of control deck that doesn't exist. I mean, and Scouts report, despite being an incredibly powerful card in this game and one of the few effects like that in the game, doesn't see play in most scout lists.
Yeah, because there's just too many better things.
Like why you're not looking for card quality because every deck in your every card in your deck is already of the highest quality.
Right. So, I think that now would be an opportune time for us to shift to our second planned topic, because we are, like we do, starting to run a little bit over because we're
That's cool.
long-winded and fun. So the other thing that we
And
wanted to talk about was the recent announcement of the tournaments for Europe, right? So the tournament scene has been a hot topic in the community for a while now. I mean, it's always been a topic, but I think the announcements of the Gwent Pro League has really ramped up the talks about, what's our tournament scene going to be like? When are we going to do these things? Again, if you're a new player, it might seem like, hey, let's take our time here, guys. But for us who have been playing for, well over a year now, to us it feels like, hey, we're already further along than Gwent, but we're still behind them. So it's been a hot topic. Have you looked at the format for the European league, if you will, at all by chance?
You know what? I haven't, but I'm going to pull it up here real quick. I was really surprised. It seemed like the announcement came out of nowhere, and I have to admit, it's not what I expected either.
Yeah, it's certainly not what I expected. And it's interesting to me that, one, the way that it was announced, people found the tournament posting before Bethesda made their announcement, right? So they were kind of already doing damage control on trying to answer questions before they'd even had the chance to frame their message. And then two, it's interesting because when they finally did have the opportunity to frame their message, they used some pretty curious phrases, right? Like, we want to take your feedback, even though we've already been giving feedback for quite some time about what we would like to see out of a tournament scene. And obviously there are some fantastic community ran tournaments. So I mean, as far as I'm concerned, you can take that as feedback. They're literally modeling what they would like to see. And then also the fact that they said that they wanted to do it on a small scale first. While I understand that, it's interesting that you're just going to come out and say that publicly, knowing that your competitor just kind of blew your announcement in many ways out of the water, right?
I agree.
So everything was framed weird.
I've got the format here. So here's what it is. It's a best of 3 format. The first pick, higher seed picks first. It says each player can have up to 16 different decks, but only one deck of each type. Playing more than one deck of a type in a series is unacceptable and punishable by losing one game. Before the match starts, both players choose 3 different decks one by one. Players use the match chat or match comments to take a screenshot of the in-game chat. This, I'm not going to lie, the first 2 rules already sound kind of amateurish.
Well, not only that, this is why I was asking if you had seen the format, right? So, not only that, but it just, it feels in many ways almost needlessly complex, right? In their wording. And I don't understand, every round I'm choosing the decks that I build, right?
Yeah.
Or bring. So, if there's not even consistency, on a round-to-round basis, it just feels
frustrating, too. How am I supposed to come up with 12 different tokens decks?
Well, I mean, jokes aside, it's frustrating because all of the stuff that would typically go into both digital tournament planning and formatting, but then also in-seat tournaments, and that experience goes right out the window with the way that this has been announced, or at least my understanding of it, right? So, one, if I'm allowed to change decks and do things in between rounds, what
it's interesting.
Why even have a deck list at all? You know what I mean? It's literally just you pick 3 things, and how does my opponent even know that I picked 3 things that were already in play? It just feels like, hey, this round you're allowed to use up to 3 different things, but no more than 3.
Right. Yeah, I would have liked to see, the classic tournament thing where there are, dudes sitting behind on a desk on a soundstage, and other dudes behind them with laptops 20 feet apart staring at each other with headphones. You know what I'm saying?
Yeah.
That's what I got in my mind for the tournament scene. That's what I was hoping for.
Yeah, I
I
mean,
will say though, like I'm glad that the tournament scene is being supported, right? And I have to be totally honest with you though. I think that the championship series that J Star and Schwitty and Bradford Lee and Ono have been doing blows this out of the water.
yeah, I mean, I think for me personally, that is the concern, and also potentially the like slap in the face sounds like harsh words, but I honestly can't think of like a better analogy, right? Like, all right, let me try to gather my thoughts here and articulate this in a way that doesn't sound like ultra negative. Um, if there's already people that are advocating for a tournament scene, and they have been for a while, right? So like, there's a demand, and that
Yeah,
they are working really hard and devoting their own time at creating a positive experience and creating something that is good for viewership as well as participants, even if
yeah,
it's not flawless, even if it's not you know um, ultra mega super production quality. It's the best we've got so far for sure, and they're certainly working hard on improving it. To like go, okay guys, like that's cool, but we're gonna try this other thing. We're not gonna like consult you, we're not gonna do anything, we're just gonna go through this other thing, and it'll be a different format. We don't even know if it'll be streamed. We are gonna give them prize support, but like we're also gonna
right.
say like, hey, give us feedback. And like I said, to me, like the existence of those community run tournaments already in many ways was feedback. That was people saying, this is what we would like to see.
Right.
Help us make this better. And for them to do something that is so wildly different than that is like saying, yeah, we see your feedback, but let's try this other thing. To me, that's
Yeah.
why I think it feels in many ways almost like a slap in the face, right? Like,
I can't disagree with you totally. I mean, and I want to comment. Yum Yum writes, the tournaments from J Star and Brad are difficult as heck for a new player to get involved with. I can kind of see where you're coming from, and I think that that's but it's one that is sort of the nature of what they're doing, right? It's like this is for the super enfranchised players. I think that the ideal tournament scene by Bethesda and Direwolf, I mean, I assume Bethesda would be running this, would be one where it's like, for instance, I haven't played Hearthstone in over a year. I still occasionally tune into Hearthstone tournaments, despite not being familiar with the current cards and stuff, because they do a good job of explaining the plays. You can watch players you're familiar with or players you're not familiar with, and root for people. It should in Fantasyland, just like tuning into a football game. You don't have to know anything about how to play football to have a good time watching the competition. This is as far from that as you can get with something that's officially sanctioned.
yeah. And to even kind of piggyback on Yum Yum's comment, I would say I agree with him. I think that those tournaments are definitely not the easiest for a new player to get involved in. But to me, I don't think that that's a reflection necessarily of the format. I think that's a reflection of the manpower and scalability, and that's
Oh
why
yeah,
I think that it would ultimately have been maybe a better route if there was a partnership with those guys, or for them to take that formatting but then expand on it, because like we have to do things like invitationals because we just simply can't accommodate 100, 200, 300 people. They just don't have the
right.
manpower. They don't have the ability to like stream that for viewers and make that be high quality content. They don't have the ability to manage that behind the scenes. um, there's just more of an issue with again, scalability and their ability to do that than I think the format itself.
Yeah,
Similarly, like times, right? Like I know that not everyone can make them. I don't get to play them very often, which is kind of a bummer, but it's just because of the way my schedule is. But every
Right.
time I've played in them, I've had a blast, and I have felt like, hey, I would do this more if they were more accessible. But I also
Sure.
understand why they're not, and so I think that
No, I hear you.
yeah, I was gonna say, if
I
anything, I just think that that's more of a reason why they should have done that instead of this other thing.
I've played in 4 of them. I got first place in one, and I got knocked out in the 3rd round in 3 of them. Because finishing on the extremes is how I maintain my consistency as a player. I it's one of those things too where it's like I would feel more inclined to participate if I mean I guess I got to be honest. I would feel more inclined to participate more often if I knew that the guys who design the game, make the game, create the game, support the game in its long-term health, were as invested in its success as I am. And I believe that they are. I really believe it, but I don't see it with the tournament scene.
Yeah, I mean that's a pretty deep comment, but like I can't refute it. You know what I mean? And I
Care about the
think
game because they talk about it. Pete obviously loves the game. AJ and G Staff, they're out there they're doing the job, doing the work, but the tournament scene's just non-existent.
yeah, and I think that one of the things that kind of makes me sad is if I had to guess, right? This is entirely conjecture. I clearly don't have inside information, but I would wager that there are folks at Direwolf Digital that are that committed, but because of like the nature of their relationship, right? Because Bethesda, I think, has final say. That's why they do, streams. This is one of those interesting things to me too, and I just kind of want to like segue to this. Um, Gwent and other card games, Hearthstone, etc. They get to do fun things where like, whether it's on YouTube or live streams, they have developers come on and talk about the game, right? And we don't
Yeah,
get that from Direwolf. And I honestly think it's because Bethesda gets final say in marketing and publishing. Again, I don't know it, but everything that we've ever seen for the game comes through the Bethesda channel. So in
right.
many ways, it's like Direwolf does the work that Bethesda requests and it gets sent up the chain and then they word it. But Bethesda doesn't have the expertise to do those developer style talks. And so like there's this weird disconnect. Like even small indie games like Shardbound. Shardbound's a game that's in a really early alpha, but I really enjoy playing it. And they do like weekly, I might even be bi-weekly now, but they do very regular like developer streams, right? They have people on, they talk about the game. You can ask them questions. They talk about road mapping and design and um,
Right. Yeah, I mean,
very, very
Direwolf used.
early. Yeah, I was going to say very, very early Direwolf did it. And then they disappeared. But they kind of disappeared at the same time that we were starting to see this game like pick up in marketing. Not that it's ever had like the best marketing campaign, but I again, it's entirely inference, but everything that I have personally seen, it leads me to believe that it's more like Bethesda wants to control the message, and that creates like this weird
Yeah.
disconnect. And I think that there are probably people at Direwolf that would love to see a flourishing tournament scene because those guys are a lot of like Magic
Right.
pros, right? Like they cut their teeth on the tournament scene. That's what they enjoy as well. Um,
Magic's another example of a game that I don't play anymore that I still enjoy watching tournaments for. You don't have to be a player to. If a good tournament scene can bring in people who are just interested in esports.
yeah, absolutely.
And I do think that there's something to what you're saying about the difficulty of being contracted to do the game and then having the marketing be done by another organization. I mean, to be fair, I don't have any idea how that all works, and I wouldn't had some insight into how they're doing it, but I do know that like Maricon is a huge proponent of the game. The guy finishes top 10 legend in addition to being one of the designers of the game. Like he obviously loves it. And everything I've ever heard the guy say suggests that he is a huge fan of this game and really believes in it. But not seeing him being able to talk on Reddit a lot about it or doing streams and videos and stuff, it's a little sad, because I'd love to see the guys who are making the game out there talking about it.
Yeah, I mean, I would love to see it as well. And as somebody, who enjoys design, right? Like, there's a reason that I, do the Forge stuff, and I love talking about, the way that cards have like flavor and function intertwined and so forth. As somebody who like adores that side of things, right? Like that aspect,
Yeah.
I want that from them, right? Like that would keep me engaged with the game, if that were to be a thing.
Yeah, I agree. I mean, not that you and I aren't like some of the most engaged people out there, right? Like, but for the for the slightly less entrenched players, I agree. I mean, and don't get me wrong, I love this game, and like, I will continue to play it and make videos for it, whether or not there's ever a tournament scene, just because the community's great. I have a lot of fun playing it, and I have a lot of fun talking to people who are playing it, and I feel like I've made some good friends, like you, that I never wouldn't have met because if it wasn't for this game. But I feel like the next logical step in growth is the big esports scene.
Yeah, or if not like esports, like maybe they're okay with just being like a niche, however you want to pronounce it, right?
Mhm.
Maybe they're okay with that, but like even still, you got to do something to give yourself some more visibility, like outside of just the Twitch drops. You know what I mean?
Although, I mean, certainly Twitch drops have done wonders for driving traffic on Twitch. I will give them that. Like, that was a really great move. But I know there's a next step, and I trust that it will happen. I just want it to happen sooner because I'm impatient.
I am equally as impatient. Um, all right, we've put it off long enough, and we are definitely running over. So I think that the next logical step for us,
Yeah.
for tonight's podcast, would be to, take some questions, answer them from the chat, because I have
Yeah,
seen
absolutely.
seen people talking, and they've been having fantastic conversations, but haven't been able to participate yet. So we should do that.
Oh, anything you guys want to ask us about? Can be about tonight's topics, can be about things that are on your mind, suggestions for future topics or future shows. Quick shout out to Nerazuri. Thank you for I don't know if you saw this, but you are a star in my most recent video. I played against you twice in 3 games. All right, we got our first question here. It's for you, so I'll read it and you answer it, all right? Charmer, are you freaking out that Bradford Lee is seeing Gwent and ignoring Legends?
I'm not freaked out at all. I mean, the truth is, I've been playing it off stream a bit, trying to re-pick it back up. I played it a ton in the closed beta. I might do like a night where I do that and some Shardbound in the near future. But I'm not concerned because one, it's Brad, and like he's gonna do what he wants to do and whatever makes him happy, and I'm always gonna be happy that other people chase the things that they are into. But I'm not really freaking out because again, the minute that this has like a a viable tournament scene, I have no doubt that like Brad would return, right? Like he's invested in this game. He enjoys playing this game. He wants it to succeed. But he's like me, right? Like I love playing games for fun, but one of the things that draws me to games like this is the fact that I play against people, right? Like it's live
Mhm.
competition, and I want that competition to drive me, even if I know that like I'm never gonna be the world champion, right? Like I love to play Overwatch. I love to play League of Legends. Um, not just because I want to hop on and like goof off, but like I play the competitive modes of those games as well. Even though I know I'm never gonna be an esport person, even though I'm never gonna play, uh, you know, in an arena or on a team or whatever the case may be, like I just like trying my best and trying to grow as a player, and you do that in competition, and so like I want to do that here as well. And I think Brad's the same way. And just unfortunately, right now, Gwent offers a superior experience for that.
Yeah, it's a good answer. All right. We have WebNG is asking. WebNG, long time listener, first time caller writes, how does it feel to be Uncle Pete's #1 net decking creator? His first 5 or so decks were named Justin's XXX. Well, WebNG, I have to tell you, the fact that my XXX is all over Pete's stream makes me really happy. I can't say any more than that without running into FCC violations, but I'm pretty proud of my position as his favorite XXX creator.
Oh man, I really just want to envision Pete Googling Justin XXX and then seeing what comes.
Yeah, I don't know. You know, if you Google image search for Elder Scrolls Legends loser, the very first thing that shows up is a picture of me smiling. Yeah. I've just actually a lot of really stupid things when you Google Elder Scrolls Legends something stupid, come up with pictures of me looking like a dumbass. But no, it's great. I think Pete Hines is a really cool dude. I think that Elder Scrolls Legends exists almost solely because of him. I think this is a passion project for him. I think this is a guy who loves Magic, who loves card games, who loves Elder Scrolls, and I think he made this happen through almost sheer force of will.
I mean, that wouldn't surprise me, you know.
It's good for him. I mean, like, this is a great game. Another question that you can go ahead and answer, Charm. We got Yum Yum asking, you guys are talking a lot about deck manipulation and former Magic stuff. Would you think a card that bounces an enemy creature to the top of their deck is a good mechanic or a good card for this game?
I mean, yeah, I think it would be an interesting mechanic that would probably have to be costed appropriately, and it would certainly be more expensive in a game like this because not only are you removing your creature, but you're also potentially denying a draw from your opponent, and you are certainly, if it's not a prophecy creature, denying a prophecy at that point, right? So for something like that, you're probably looking at it would need to be costed similarly to Arrest, right? Like, I know Arrest seems like it's overcosted, but really, when you think about all the things that Arrest does, it denies last gasp. It could potentially, give you passive effects, right? Because it doesn't silence the creature. So if like you steal a Murkwater Shaman, you get passive benefits, et cetera, et cetera. You can blink it and then get control of the creature. Arrest has all these like tangential yet powerful effects tied to it, which is why it's as expensive as it is. So something that like, removes a creature, denies a draw, prevents a prophecy trigger would definitely be expensive. So
yeah, I like that. That, you know what you made me think of is I'd love to see a prophecy card, or not a prophecy card, I'm sorry. I'd love to see a red card. Well, yeah, red card with prophecy that when it's summoned deals damage to yourself. Combine the prophecy mechanic with the afflicted elite mechanic, except just to yourself. Kind of like, there are Magic cards, Hearthstone cards that are overstated that deal damage to you when you play them as sort of a drawback. I think that would be really interesting with the prophecy mechanic. We got another question here. Zombie Hunter 9x19 out in the Koga Pass. Watch out for traffic on the 105, by the way, writes, are you concerned about the potential longevity of the Elder Scrolls Legends? Well, Zombie Hunter, I have to say that I am not concerned about the potential longevity of Elder Scrolls Legends. I'm going to be here for the long haul. And the fact that Bethesda is supporting this means that they have money in the bank to keep this rolling for as long as we're here. And to be honest with you, my numbers are up. They're up like nothing else I have ever seen. Everything is going swimmingly as far as the community goes. And I think that, concerns about the expiration of Elder Scrolls Legends are incredibly premature. The game is actually doing better than it's ever done as far as my viewership and subscriber numbers go. And because I am a slave to the numbers, that's all I have to say about that. Charmer, same question to you, my friend.
So I'm not concerned, but I'm actually going to take a different approach. One, because I don't have the smooth, silky voice of you, but also because I've said this in the past, and I think this is a great time for me to reiterate it. I don't think that anybody should ever be concerned with the longevity of a card game. I don't think at all. Not only is it a sunk cost fallacy trap, And if you don't know what that is, I highly encourage you to Google it and look into things like the sunk cost fallacy. But just legitimately, right? Whenever I look at my time spent on like any game, um, I just think about what my return on investment is and what I feel comfortable with, right? So if I'm going to, start playing Legends and, let's say I drop like $20 on packs, right? How many hours do I have to play the game for me to feel good about that $20? That's all I care about. I don't care if I'm going to be, playing the game 2 years from now. Like that shouldn't be the deciding factor for me spending $20 when I'm going to spend more than that when I go see like It on Sunday. You know what I mean? Similarly, if I buy a board game, I'm not thinking to myself like, gee, how many times am I going to play this board game over the next like 3 years or whatever? Like I've bought board games that I've played once and then just never got around to it again, and I still don't feel bad about buying them because the one time I played it, I had a blast. So for me, I legitimately think that with card games, I see very, very often people are like, I want to invest in this game, but I'm really worried. Is it going to make it? Is it going to be like in for the long haul? And I think that that is the wrong way to look at any game, period, let alone card games. And it's actually that mentality that hurts the growth of games because people are timid. You don't need to get like a year's investment. You need just like, a certain number of hours. And then even if it's a smaller number of hours, did it increase my enjoyment, right? Like, do I want to grind for a month on free to play just so that I can maybe play the deck archetype I wanted to play? Or do I want to like drop $20 so that I can play the deck I wanted to play now, but get like 10 or 20 hours out of that deck archetype now, right? So that I wasn't miserable for a month while I grinded for it. So to me, I don't think anybody should be concerned about the longevity of anything. And you should definitely just do what makes you happy because it's your entertainment. So that's me.
That's a great answer, dude. That's a great answer. I totally agree with you. Also, I'm going to go see It on Sunday as well, so let's talk about that.
Yeah, we're gonna see ours, I think, around noon. That's when we have the babysitter lined up. So if you go see it at around noon, it'd be like 11 a.m., I guess, because of the time zone difference for you. I think you're actually, you might be even more hours than that behind me. But either way, if we're at the same time, like we can just text each other and it'll be like we saw it together.
That'd be cool. Do you think the giant spider's going to be in it? You've seen the
Uh,
original, right?
I've seen the original. I don't know
Okay.
if the giant spider is going to be in it. I doubt that it's going to be any more true to the books
Yeah.
because, like, let's be honest, right? Like, they're not going to have the underage orgy.
Right.
They're
Yeah, I've
not
read
going
the
to
book.
have. Oh, yeah. But I mean, I'm excited. I think it'll be good. I really like the director. I thought the first it's Fukunawa or Fukuna. I can never say his name right, but it's a guy that did first season of True Detective, right?
Oh, is it really? Okay.
I'm like ninety
I love.
percent certain. Now I'm gonna double check, but
All right.
uh, I'm pretty sure that it is, and I loved the like feel.
Yeah. All right. Well, while you check, we got another caller on the line. Hayden56 asks, "Do you guys think the decks with 60 or more cards will ever be viable? What would you add or change about the game to make it viable, even a little?" Well, let me tell you something, Hayden56. I am not a fan of running any more cards than I have to. I'll be honest. I'm a little under the weather. I'm a little unhealthy as it is, and so running, overextending myself, is not something I'm really capable of. And in fact, I'm going to go ahead and say that you should be running 50 cards, not 60. That said, a Battle of the Wit style card, like in Magic, where you win the game if you have 250 cards in your deck, would be interesting, right? A card that says, summon +1/+1 if your deck has 70 or more cards in it is definitely something that I would like to see, just so it encourages a new type of deck being built. I'm not super concerned about it though, and simply because a deck with 70 or more cards is not going to be competitive, right? The increased variability of your draws is going to make it that much worse, and the bonuses would have to be substantial in order to encourage you to play those types of cards, and I don't know that that's necessarily healthy for the game.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's legit on the health. Quick update. Andy Machete's the director. I'm probably slaughtering his last name, but you're probably going to know him from the movie Mama. But Kerry, the guy that I was thinking of, Kerry Fukunaga, is the guy who is writing this version, and he's the one who did first season of True Detective. So,
Oh, cool. Yeah, that was a great show.
yeah, I think I would love to see more things like Jarl and have alternate like win conditions, but similarly, I don't think that they can be overtly too strong because we don't have instance, right? Realistically, we don't have that interruption, so
Yeah, I can agree with that. WebNG writes, what about if milling strategies become a thing with new cards, for example? Wouldn't running 50 plus cards then be beneficial? Well, WebNG, milling has been a strategy in Magic the Gathering since the printing of Millstone in the original set of Magic Alpha back in 1991, I believe, maybe 92. But either way, it has never been beneficial in Magic to run additional cards in your deck simply to combat mill. That said, it could be possible if the correct mill cards are printed in Legends. It's possible, but for the most part, I think that mill is an interesting strategy that I wish was supported, but I don't believe that running additional cards for a single matchup would be worth the trade-off there.
yeah, I don't think that running more cards would be beneficial. You would just run instead um, cards that help you combat it in different ways. So if we actually saw mill become a strategy, you would see an uptick in people playing Journey to Sovngarde, for example.
That's a good example, yeah. It's a
You
good
know,
point.
so I think that like the game plan is fine if they do want to support that mechanic, as long as they have more cards like Journey, where maybe shuffle a couple more cards back in or whatever. Um, I think that that could be a thing. I personally, uh, I was talking with my buddy that I've been playing Magic with for longer than I would care to admit. I was telling him that one of my favorite deck archetypes in Magic used to be Old Buried Alive,
Oh yeah.
and that's something that I wish like they're kind of doing it a little bit with some of the reanimation effects and like soul tear effects, but I wish something like that existed in this game. And it was going to be the subject of one of my Forge videos, but as I started trying to get into editing, it was really involved to try to like showcase what I wanted. I really wanted basically a card like either like Ashen Ghoul or Undead Gladiator, or
Yeah.
basically what I really want is something like Buried Alive that lets you find cards in your deck and put them in the grave. And then while they're in the grave, because we actually can interact with our discard pile in this game, I'd love it if when you clicked on the thing and your list popped out, and you were
Mhm.
staring at your list of cards, there would be like a little icon like also on the name of the card that would pop up, or maybe it was just something to let you know that like, hey, this one matters for a reason. And then maybe it's you pay a magic cost, maybe it's you pay an alternative cost, but whatever the case may be, you could click on them and interact with them in your discard pile and make them pop back out, right?
Yeah, I like
So
that.
I think that would be really interesting because I loved like Ashen Ghouls and things like that. Um, I'd like to see that kind of in this game.
I like that. But that makes me think of is I've noticed a trend towards red having sort of strength having sort of tech control type answers, right? Garnag was the first big one like this, but um, Withered Hand Cultists, stuff like that have been sort of the red domain of control style cards. I'd like to see a red card printed in the near future that destroys all cards in all discard piles.
Yeah, I could see that. I mean, you and I have both in various YouTube videos talked in the past about how strength in many ways is um, it's got like a very specific identity in this game, and one of them is the way that I describe it. Uh, you can't do that. Like that's what I always say, right? Like it's the rule setter. It says, "Hey, you wanted to do that thing? Sorry, not allowed." Right? Like it like almost browbeats you in a way. Garnag. Hey, you
Yeah,
want Magicka? No, you can't do that. Withered Hand Cultist. Oh, you wanted to play actions? No, you can't do that. Um, it's
I agree. It's the prison control color.
yeah,
Prison, like the magic term, actually, not like the place where.
Yeah.
Yeah. um, Immortal King writes, Dear Charmer, do you think that purple needs any unconditional removal added, or do you feel it is a viable drawback to having decks running heavy purple?
I think it's a viable drawback. So,
I agree.
you can kind of already see a little bit of their Magic history bleeding through. The developers, a lot of them are ex-pro Magic players or still pro Magic players, but they kind of take Magic's color pie concept and apply it in this game, and I think it's entirely fine because we can mix and match the attributes. So it's fine for me that endurance doesn't have good removal options because in my mind they should just have like big creatures and they should have guards and they should have like life gain because they're endurance, right? They're meant to endure but not like control, right? Like they're the immovable object in my mind. And then you would offset that by pairing it with another attribute. So in my opinion, I don't think that endurance needs to have that. I like that the ones that they do have are like very conditional, right? Like it's either transforming the creature, setting its stats to one, a la lay down arms or things like that.
I agree. I think creatures in the game, so let's not go overboard here.
Yeah.
Okay, so we'll answer the remaining questions and then this one actually. So here we go. 10 Keel writes, Justin Larson, looking forward to future expansions. Do you think they should be modeled more around the core set, very strong, unique legendaries, and etc., or more like Skyrim with lots of strong, non-unique legendaries, commons, rares, and etc.? Well done, Kyle. I think that my future expansion dream is actually something we talked about earlier in the show. What I'd like to see is an expansion, a very small expansion full of build-around type cards like the Madhouse Collection. I think that would be a healthy and exciting way to diversify the meta without asking players to spend a whole lot of money. Next we have WebNG asks, Dear Charmer and Dear Justin, what's your favorite NFL team and why is it better than your counterpart's favorite team? I'll let Charmer go first so I can explain why he's wrong.
I first started watching football in the early 90s. I probably watched it sooner, but that was the first time I started like realistically paying attention as a young child. So as a result, I am not a fan of the like local hometown teams like a lot of people. I was swayed by what was on television. So for pro football, the first Super Bowl I ever watched was the 92 one. And as such, I am a fan of the Washington Football Club. And they have been horrible ever since. So it doesn't matter what team Justin is a fan of. It could be a Canadian League team. It's probably better than my Washington Football Club.
That is, of course, the incorrect answer. The correct answer is the best football team is the Mexican national team. Moving on. All right. Affinity for Herbal writes, speaking of prison-style MTG decks, how about a red card that lets people only play one card per turn? Affinity for Herbal, I think you've struck gold here. That is the sort of fascinating card that I would love to see printed. What about your opinion, Charmer?
Yeah. I think that it would fit the theme of the attribute. I love that the attributes have identities in this game, and it certainly would fit strength based on what we know. And it would be, just like Garnag is to, ramp strategies, it would be like the anti-market deck in many ways.
And that's exactly the sort of control mechanic that like the rule setting mechanic that I want to see more of in Red. I'd like to one day be able to play a mono red control deck. I'm not gonna lie. Like, I fantasize about doing stuff like that.
Yeah.
All right. 1 hour writes, I do not come from an MTG background, but I do know that ramping in Hearthstone has become a big issue. With how easy it is to ramp in this game and the many advantages it brings, do you think the ramp mechanic should be revisited in this game? Was ramping ever an issue or abused in MTG? Well, 1 hour. There have been historically a couple of overpowered ramp cards. Coming to mind immediately are early cards Fast Bond and Channel, which allowed players to ramp to an incredible game and gain an unsustainable advantage. At this point, I don't believe Legends has the potential for that sort of blowout. It's not like you're dropping Anduin on turn 4 yet, which would have been possible with cards like Channel. But I do believe that it is one of those mechanics that should have a cap on how many playable sources of ramp there are in any given standard format. How do you feel about this, Charmer?
So, comparing it to Magic is an interesting decision because, in my opinion, there's ramp and then there's like cost cheat mechanics. And in Magic, in my experience, it was the cheat mechanics that were always the problematic ones, with a very few like small exceptions. So, Channel to me is like a cost cheat because it like really lets you go overboard, right? Like you're basically just investing your life to play something for free at that point. Even cards like Force of Will to this day are incredibly powerful and staples in their formats. Cards like the Affinity for Artifacts, when Affinity first came out in Mirrodin, they had to do a round of nerfs when that came out because that was just like cheat on cheat on cheat, and it's not quite the same as ramp. But like ramp, just traditional ramp effects, when I think of like, 12 post tooth and nail, those decks were strong but never like overtly broken. When I think of, rampant growth based decks, Titan based decks, I think that those are fine in Magic. As I said earlier in the show, in many ways they're almost just more about consistency over like outright insane ramp strategies.
Yeah,
You
a
know,
lot
the
of magic, a lot of Magic ramp is color fixing.
Yeah, like the one time that I would say that it was ever a problem would be, and again, in many ways these are like cheat instead of ramp as well, but like the Lotuses and the Moxes, right? Black Lotus, Moxes, even Lotus Petal was certainly abused and is abused to this day. But Magic's also a very like different game,
Yeah,
so I
because of the
don't.
difference in the resource mechanic, I think it's difficult to compare with Magic.
Yeah. For this game though, I honestly don't think it needs to be revisited. I just
Yeah,
think that because I think that the mechanic is fine. I just think that the tools that it has provided in the colors that abuse it now um, outmatch the other tools. So rather than nerfing it, I would rather just see other colors get different tools. I've joked about it, but I would love to see something that is legitimately just like a 3-3 for 3 that says if your opponent has more max magicka than you, reduce it by 1. So it's a 3-3 for 3, and if they've ramped, then you set them back a ramp. Okay.
yeah,
You
I
know?
like that.
But even if it's not anti-ramp, just more tools, right? Give us, something in the other attributes that make it so that the late game isn't, so heavily favored in Scouts Arena the way that it is right now. And then I think you're fine. Yeah, I think that
How do
the
you,
mechanic is fine.
what do you think about a card, a 1/1 with guard for 3? Summon, your opponent loses 1 max magicka.
No. Here's
No,
why. Here's why. That will never happen. It has to have the words. It has to have the caveat if they have more max magicka than you. Because um, one of the things that they try to tamper down, both in this game and in games like Hearthstone, are the times where there is like no interaction, right?
yeah, yeah, yeah. I
And
agree. I agree.
that leads to a playstyle where you lock your opponent out. And I say this as somebody whose one of their favorite deck archetypes was land destruction and magic. But again,
Right.
I've admitted to being that guy. I love looking across at my opponent and knowing that they can't do anything and that they are forced to concede. Land destruction was that deck, right? Like when you turn 1 birds, turn 2 stone rain, turn 3 stone rain, turn 4 like plow under, and now like I've got 5 or 6 magicka and my opponent still has 1, you know it's just one of those things that like it's going to be unfun for the person who loses to it, and even if it's not good, like the 1 or 2 times it goes off will be so unfun that it will drive people away, right? That's not we have cards like Solitaire, right? So like even that card, like yeah, you do it and then maybe play the second one and they're behind, but then they've now once they start to stabilize and they kill your guard, now you're just reanimating it with Solitaire and or whatever other effects there are printed in the future. yeah, like I don't see them ever printing a mechanic that negates Max Magica like permanently. Like Garnag is a temporary thing and a unique legend, so him I get, and it still lets you at least go to 7, right? But something that just outright destroys Max Magica, unless it's targeting something that has been ramped, I don't see
Yeah,
it, because you also would have to answer the question from a design standpoint, like what happens at 12, right?
yeah.
If I'm destroying Max Magica before we hit that 12 mark, does that mean that like that person's Max Magica stops at 10, or is it like gonna still go to 12 and then you can only naturally cap at 12? Like they would have to basically like define that as a rule set.
I totally agree with you, and I'm glad that's your answer. I asked because I know you're a fan of Stone Rain,
Yeah.
so I gave the tree pillager. That's cool. I mean I totally agree with you on that 100%.
Yeah,
Do you think that Thorn Hissmage is the problem?
I do. I kind of alluded to that earlier when I said that I think that the biggest problem with Thorn Hissmage is that it does, I think, everything too well.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? Like it ramps its defensive without sacrificing stats, and if it goes unanswered, then it hits harder than other 5 drops, and
Yeah, I
even
agree.
more so like in my mind the same way that lightning bolt defines like what is good at 4 drops and beyond. Like how many creatures do you say like are junk because they died a lightning bolt, right? Like lightning bolt is one of those like meta defining cards because it sets a standard. To
Right,
me,
right.
Hissgrove is like the creature version of that. To me, it's Hissgrove and Hive Defender. And I'm not necessarily, I don't want it to sound like I'm saying Hive Defender is a problem either, but like from a creature standpoint, in my mind, those two also set a standard for the meta. It's why I felt that the Thief of Dreams nerf was too harsh. I've said it before and I'll say it again. I think it should have been nerfed to a 5/4. There's a
Yeah.
big difference between 5 health and 4
Oh yeah.
health. Going to 4, not just because it dies to lightning bolt, but just because the number of things that trade into it and kill it are a big deal. But it needed to at least be big enough to kill Hiss Mages, right?
Yeah.
The fact that
I
Hiss
agree.
Mage, like if Hiss Mage was dropped to a 3/4, um, it would be a massive nerf, but it would also be making it like incredibly more manageable. Like the 5 health is a big deal because it can't die to lightning bolt and it can't die to,
Yeah.
all of these things that you would, uh, want to trade into it with. So for
Right.
me, I think it's either like that gets the axe or the it gains power as you gain magicka gets the axe, because again, it does too many things well. Right? It's defensive, it ramps, and it can hit like a truck if you let it.
You know what deck I think decks win if to 4 is important, but I think the decks that win the most if Thorn Hissmage goes to 3/4 or 2/4 are decks that run Cliff Racer's always been just sort of like I'm trying to think of an appropriate way to say this. It's been blocked by by Thorn Hissmage for the entirety of the game, you know?
Yeah.
It's one of those things. It's interesting.
Yeah, it's so interesting how in a game like this, literally 1 health or 1 attack can matter in a
Yeah.
card's like strength and viability as much as it does. But it totally, like we've seen it time and time again, right? Like Brynjolf is at least starting to see play just because he got 1 health. Reeve went from non-existent to almost auto include in any strength mid-range deck just by gaining 1 attack. Um, yeah, like his mage, I do think uh, is potentially the problem, just because not only does it do everything else well, but it's just you know like we were talking about Ramp Warrior and how it's starting to see some play, right? But like to me, it pales in comparison still, because it doesn't have his mage. Um,
Yeah. Right, right. I agree. Yeah, I mean the when a bunch of cards got nerfed down to 2 toughness, everything changed. The entire meta changed. And I think it would only take a small change to a couple cards to do the same thing. I do kind of like the suggestion in chat actually about making Hismage a 2/4 that gains health instead of attack. It would do the same kind of blocking, right? In fact, it would be better at it, but it would be a really fascinating change. It's the kind of balance changes I'd love to see happen for like a month and
Yeah,
then go back.
it would probably have to be a 2-3 if worded that way, because it would be at 2-4 it would just come into play as a 2-5. And to me,
Right. No,
I think that the 5 health is the problematic part, just on initial cast. But I don't know, maybe not. I mean, it is a class card, so like class cards are meant to be more powerful than others, but like
yeah, I agree.
legitimately, when you look at something like Treeminder, right, at 3, now again, it's not a class card, but at 3, you get a 1/1 guard that doesn't grow that ramps. And then for 2 more, I
Right.
get so many more stats and like ongoing benefit. Like there's a disconnect there, right? So
Yeah. Ultrametal 666. By the way, hail Satan out there in Waccoga Pass. I hope you're not running into traffic in the 105. Writes, talk about the lookout card that heals as well. Well, Ultrametal 666. I think that's a great card. I think that card gives the scout deck a lot of game against a lot of aggressive decks that otherwise might be able to mount a comeback. And it is the card I am most surprised was not changed in the balance patch recently. How do you feel, Charmer?
yeah, I'm kind of surprised it didn't get a change. I think everyone expected it to go to a 3-3. I was probably in that boat, if only because of the consistency in stats that it would have had with some of the other like quote unquote lookout cards. Now, granted, the willpower one just got a stat buff, right? So now it is in a similar boat to lookout, but like before that was a 2-4, right? So 6 total stats for the cost. The red one that draws you a card was a 3-3, 6 total stats for the cost. The blue one is, the 4-2 that gains ward or whatever, right? So 6 stats for the cost. Like, Lookout from the get-go has been the one that, stands out. Now, I don't mention the Endurance one because it wasn't a 3-drop, right? Like, that was a 2-3, but that's a 2-drop. So, like, Woodland Lookout just has inherently been the strongest, not even counting the effect, just the strongest from a if I play this, I get the most value if I never get a trigger standpoint. That continues to be the case, and it also is the one with potentially the biggest upside out of all of them.
Yeah.
So it really does dwarf the others. So I was expecting it to go to a 3-3. I'm not sure that doing that like even hurts Scout, if I'm being honest, because most Scouts are playing it and then also playing a dragon. Like they're basically waiting till they have 9 or more magicka and they're using it for burst healing anyway. So I honestly don't even think it affects that deck, but I would have expected to see that change.
Yeah, I agree. I have one more letter here from SR1999. SR1999 writes, Dear Justin, based on the recent patch changes, Blue Midrange, Imprison, and Shieldbreaker were nerfed. These particular nerf cards are now seeing very little play with the exception of Imprison. However, Solitaire saw 3 of in every ramp deck. Do you think they addressed what the actual problem with Solitaire was? That's an interesting question. I think that every deck that was running Solitaire before the nerf is indeed still running Solitaire. I don't have the data behind me that hopefully Direwolf has, but it feels to me that the change to Solitaire was a tempo change that didn't really impact the card at all because that is a deck that ramps Magicka. And of course, the combo kill with Giant Bat is still on the table because that's something you pull off turns 8, 9, and ends, 8, 9, 10, so on and so forth. That said, I'm not sure that Scout is the powerhouse deck that sometimes people often believe it is. I think that it is incredibly popular and warping the meta, but I'm not sure that it is, going to give you the win rate that suggests the deck itself is broken. I just think that the types of decks that rise up to beat it are fairly linear, boring decks, and that the meta itself is suffering as a result of that.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's a fair assessment. Like, there's been a lot of different ways to suggest how Solitaire like could be nerfed, and you could go in those directions. I will say this about it: I think that the increase in cost is more important than people gave it credit for. I've certainly lost games that I would have won in the past because of the increase in cost. It did a great job of breaking up what I called the 357 opener, which was like Treeminder or Histgrove into Histmage into Solitaire plus Histmage again. Now, there are other things that you can do as a 357 opener, but that was by far the strongest opener that a scout could have, like, just
Yeah, I agree.
period. And so even
He's the
just,
strongest opener in the game.
yeah, so like even just tempering that a little bit, I think helped. But yeah, like Solitaire is a tricky card because you either have to do something that outright neuters it, or you do something that, in my opinion, doesn't change it like at all. Um, you either neuter it and you have to say something like, you put the card on top of your deck as opposed to in your hand, at which point it becomes like infinitely worse. Or you can do something that says like maybe level 1 is it returns a card that costs like 3 or less, and then after that it's like return any card, and then the last one is like return a card and buff it. That would slow things down, but it doesn't stop the bat train realistically. Bat train! Yeah, seriously, like it doesn't stop that at all. The only thing that potentially impacts is like the Parthenax looping, but then again, like you're already playing Soul Terror, so you will have leveled it by the time you play Soul Terror that you get from Parthenax. Like doing something like that, I honestly don't think changes the card's interactions at all, and doing something as drastic as putting the card on top of your deck almost nerfs it into unplayability at that point. So I think that the cost was the safe adjustment. I think it was the right adjustment to make at the beginning, and if they need to make further adjustments, they can. But I think that was like the safe, non-knee-jerk reaction.
I agree. Been going, man. This has been a good show.
Yeah, I think so. I think we'll probably take let's say like 1 or 2 more questions and we'll wrap it up. I could just keep doing this forever, but at least in terms of the cast, we'll have to cut it off for time considerations, and then like always, you're more than welcome to hang out for the entirety of the stream. But
all right, well, let's ask the 2 that are on screen right now. All right.
Yeah.
Shinara wants to know what our favorite cards are in the Elder Scrolls Legends. What's your favorite card, man?
Ooh, this one's always tough. I always say it's like trying to pick what my favorite child is. In terms of all of the different unique ways that you can like use it and abuse it, it's Nord Firebrand. I know it's a problem child and causes nightmare for some, but there's a reason that like I have time to fight as an emote. It's because whether it's a market deck, whether it's a Stealer of Secrets like OTK deck, whether it's just even like Ray Chargels / Charger / Time to Fight, like I just like the different archetypes and things. Like it's literally so basic. Like it's just a 0 cost 1/1, but it's so like versatile and it matters. So like I love the opportunities that card creates. But from a flavor standpoint, like the card that I always want to shoehorn into everything, and I try, and then I always pull it out because I just can't justify it. It's probably Orb of Vermina.
Oh, that's a good choice. That's a good card. I mean, well, it's not a good card. It may be a good card. In the right meta, it's obviously great. But I like Orb of Vermina.
Yeah, I like it because it's card advantage, but it's not necessarily quality card advantage, but it also gives you information about your opponent's deck. You know what I mean? Like it's just one of those things that like does a little bit, but not a lot. But when it does hit, it like feels. I like cards like that like when they hit and they hit like really really awesome. It creates feel good moments. So like I'm a huge fan of, and for similar reasons, Riften Pickpocket. Like I love playing Riften Pickpocket. I get to see stuff that my opponent is playing.
Yeah.
I get to make a decision. I'm a huge fan of what I call micro decisions in card games. I think that's what makes a quality card game, is when they present player-based decisions that I feel like matter. Yeah, like so Orb of Ermina creates interesting scenarios. Rift and Pickpocket, I love stuff like that.
Rift and Pickpocket's is a card that, with a small shift in the meta, could be. I mean, it's an incredibly powerful card in a deck that doesn't see much play right now. My favorite card today, I mean, it changes a lot. With my favorite card today being. I mean, I'm so inspired by the fact that Altar of Despair is on your screen. I just want to say Altar of Despair, but I've always liked Vigilant Giant, man. With guard for 8 that draws you a card.
Yeah.
I think that card is super powerful. That's a card I always want to play. I'm going to go with that. It's real straightforward, not really interesting, but that's my pick for today. But Altar of Despair is a personal favorite as well. All right. Oh, and our last question is, will Pilfer Monk ever be viable? Answer, with the cards we have available now, no.
Yeah, not with the cards we have available. I think we talked about it like briefly in the last podcast, and I know I've talked about it in an episode of The Forge, but
Yeah.
As long as Pilfer requires you to attack your opponent's face, and they tried to help it by giving the the slay creature out, but as long as it's like aggression based, it's going to be too snowbally all in. So it's either going to be the kind of deck that like dominates the meta or is just always outside of like true viability, with no real in between. Now we could see a shift if they print more things like our 2/3 buddy, that allow you to trigger Pilfer in other ways. Because right now, one of the things we have to remember is the Pilfer cards that exist are balanced around the fact that they had to hit face. So if we get more cards that allow us to trigger Pilfer in other ways, we might see more powerful Pilfer effects creep in, because it's not just about snowballing 100% at that point. So
I think your best bet for seeing more Pilfer cards see play would be that you scrap it as a monk only thing. You start slapping it on any card that triggers when it hits another player, and then every deck runs 1 or 2 different Pilfer cards because cards. But as far as the synergies between just Pilfer creatures go, it's all in and it's usually all out.
yeah.
And I think that you could make an argument that because the Master of Thieves Den combo is something you could shove into anything at any point. Like you may see a deck try to trigger a combo kill like that, because that combo exists. For 8 Magicka, slapping both those on the board, you could give all your creatures double strike functionally. Bet for seeing Pilfer as a game-winning mechanic in the future.
Yeah. I mean, I could even see in many ways like a control deck that just looks to win with that at some point.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, myself. I tried to do it with Dwemer actually, so I didn't try as hard as I probably should have, but
right. So we're going to go ahead and wrap up our podcast now. I want to thank everybody for hanging out. This is the podcast portion. We'll obviously stick around, and at least I will obviously interact. Justin's more than welcome to hang out as well. But yeah, we're going to wrap up the podcast portion here. So thanks everybody for hanging out.